So Susie's bad news is I didn't win the $400 million lottery. So
New York yesterday.
No, I wasn't looking for you.
No, that's my wife.
It's too late. I chose it. It wasn't because it was the only available.
No, you would retire, you'd have to spend the rest of
Do
your
it on
life.
November 29th.
You'd have to spend the rest of your life.
All right, good. We got a little echo there. Too loud. Is that better? Where the echoes from? All right, good morning, welcome to September 22nd budget hearing meeting. Is that you, Dara? Yeah. If there's any issues with Zoom, please use the comments for technical issues. Otherwise, use the hand raise function. If you're in the
Whoa. I remember the 60s.
It's going to be a rock show.
Get the lights.
If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We're going into county matters. These items include non-routine or controversial matters and are listed alphabetically by department. If a member of the board or staff may request that an item be heard out of order. We only have one item today, which is the County Administrative Office, item 1.1. Conduct budget hearings for consideration for the recommended budget for fiscal year 21-22. Recommended expenditures, including contingency, total $124,249,960. Are there any questions?
I believe we're good. Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Chairman Brown said, we're here to conduct our annual budget hearings. We are presenting the board with a balanced budget. So rather than going through and doing how much we have Craig on the line, who's going to do a presentation explaining the budget in detail, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that the board or public has concerning the budget. Thank you.
And Craig is on. And then just for members of the public, so after the presentation, then this will open up the public comment. Correct?
I believe so, yes.
All right. All right, Craig, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair, honorable board members. Craig Goodman. I'm not sure what my title is here. I think I'm still a consultant in Trinity County. Here to present budget for fiscal year 2021-2022. And what we realized going through this budget, just to kind of put a little front end on this, is that it's very similar to last year's budget, with the major changes being that the new jail is close to completion, if not completed at this point. And then an increase, what's offsetting that decrease in expenses, an increase to the needed bodies to operate that larger jail efficiently. So I think you're going to see that going through here. And then there's some trends that we're going to talk about during this presentation that will continue for a few more years based on prior labor negotiations and such. So let's just go ahead and get started. All right, so total budget. As you mentioned, I think there's a few typos. I'm not sure if Susie, did you want to take care of those now before we get started, or?
Sure, I can do that. There were a few typos, and we added some corrected backup. It posted yesterday and was sent out. The first was in the total budget number on the budget memo. It should read $124,289,960, and the cost of salary and benefits compared to the total budget is 35.1%, not 35.3%. There are some other corrections in a couple of the schedules within the overview section, but those don't really affect our presentation. There was a correction in the debt services amount that's being recommended for total expenditures. And then the graph in the overview section on page 15 shows how to correction in the total budget amount, and then changing that, modified a couple of the percentages for each function a little bit. But those are all available online, and all of you supervisors have a copy. It was emailed to you, and there was a copy left in your inboxes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. And any changes that Susie just mentioned, they're very minor compared to the $124 million that we're going to talk about. So as you can see, there's a 7.8% decrease from the 2021 budget. Like I said, the majority of that is that we had a large capital outlay amount last year for the new jail. This year's is much smaller in comparison. It's contributing the majority of this decrease. Debt service payments are fully funded in this budget. That was one of those last second changes. That's that $40,000 adjustment, I believe, was going to debt service to pay for one of the debts that we'll talk about later. And then 35.1% of the total budget countywide is for salaries and benefits. So a little over 1/3 is what we pay for our labor staff and their benefits. All right, so let's get into it. Where are we spending this $124 million? Well, you're going to see that basically there are three areas that are about approximately 1/5, or just short of 1/5 of our budget, and that's public assistance, health and sanitation, and public protection. The other two large pieces are public ways and facilities, which is about 30%, almost 30% of our budget, and general government, which is obviously 13.48% of our budget. But this is how the breakout of this $124 million is happening. One of the things I want to point out here is this kind of gives you the full picture of what's being spent, but it doesn't tell you from what sources these monies are being spent. And so when we get into the general fund, you're going to see that the general fund is mainly, and I'm not sure if, can you see my mouse moving around here?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So when we get to the general fund, you're going to see that the majority of the general fund budget is dealing with these two pie pieces. So what does that say about these? Because when we talk about general fund, people are going to look at that and go, well, why aren't we spending anything on health and sanitation and public assistance and public ways and facilities? This is majority of their money for these functions comes from federal and state funding. And so that I just wanted to point that out this year so that you could see that, understand this chart a little bit better, and we'll go to the next one. So the major budget components in here, you have $17.2 million for road and airport projects. You got about $3 million left for the new jail construction, which I think a lot of that is the internal furniture and different things in there. $21.5 million is transfers, and if you remember, I talk about this every year, but it's important to remind everyone. Transfers are simply the authority to move cash from one fund to another. So in the case of, say for instance, a special revenue fund that is earmarked, and by earmarked it's restricted for a specific purpose. It resides in that fund, but there may be an operating fund that actually spends stuff that they can use that money for. They will then transfer that cash over, okay? So that's not actually going outside of the county, it's just simply moving from one fund to another so that it can be spent appropriately. The $43.6 million for salaries and benefits here, $17.6 million of that approximately comes from the general fund, which is actually 65.9% of the general fund budget, so it's more, the general fund budget is we spend about 2/3 of the general fund budget for our labor and benefit costs. And that's because we're service oriented. All right, $26 million for non-general fund, because these are the departments that we talked about. If you think about public ways and facility function, and you think about public assistance, and you think about health and sanitation, particularly in the public ways and facilities, they're going to spend much more money on their materials, their equipment, and those sorts of things, as well as in your service departments for the public assistance and health and sanitation, health and human services. They're going to spend, anything that they spend for their non-salary and benefits is going to be more on their contractors and medical supplies and different things that they need. So in fiscal year 21-22, our county continues to budget 100% of our ADC for OPEB. That's other post-employment benefits other than pension. So this is not CalPERS. This is health insurance costs for retirees. And for setting aside money for our active employees so that when they become retirees and they qualify for this benefit, they will also be covered. I believe in negotiations that this benefit has an end date at this point. So we're expecting to see that help us down the road in reducing this cost. So you can see here the first bullet under there is unfunded OPEB liability as of June 30th, 2020 was $50 million, about $50.5 million, okay? One thing to note about this liability is when they measure it, the accounting standard requires that we use a measurement period that is in a certain range, and we have picked 1 year old data. So basically, this is based on a year-old data. That's why in the second bullet, I'm giving you multiple measuring points here. So our PARS trust that the board approved some time ago, that we have now, with our fully funded ADC, begun to really push money to, is the balance of June 30, 2019 was only about $464,000, okay? That's the number that's been used by the accounting standard to come up to that $50.5 million left in June 30th, 2020. Okay? This is going to be a little bit technical, a little confusing, but I want to clarify because I want you to see that we're a lot better off than the $50.5 million owed. You'll see that in June 30th, 2020, our PARS trust balance is $5.2 million. That's the result of us doing 100% of our ADC less the cost, the actual cost that we had to spend on retiree health, and the remainder of that is put into this OPEB PARS trust, okay? And so you can see that we put nearly, I know it earned about $80,000 during 2020. So it's, what's that, 4.7 million that we put into there approximately. We're anticipating that we will continue that trend as our ADC is fully funded. We will continue to stockpile this fund to make sure that benefit is safeguarded, okay, that we've already agreed to. So down below, you'll see the OPEB ISF. This is the mechanism that we charge out to the departments and we collect it from the departments and then we submit it over to PARS for the OPEB trust for Trinity County. Here, the OPEB balance as of June 30, 2020 has $10 million in it. Some would ask, why is there so much money there and why isn't it in the OPEB trust? Good question, glad you asked. That's because as we were making our stair steps up the ladder to get to 100% of ADC, there was not a push to put that into the OPEB trust at that time. What we're doing now is we're phasing in to begin to shrink the amount that's in the ISF fund and put it over into the OPEB trust fund. One thing to note, and it's easy to see with these three bullets, is that top number is your liability number. It's based on a standard, and that standard only allows us to deduct the amount of fiduciary assets, that means assets that belong to the OPEB recipients, okay, in the future for their benefit. It only allows us to deduct off of our liability, our actuarially determined liability, the amount that we have in an irrevocable trust, which is our PARS OPEB trust. So the 50.5 can only deduct the 463 in that year and the 5.2 million in that year. The OPEB ISF balance is not reducing your liability on your balance sheet because the standard doesn't allow it to. As we start pushing that money over into the PARS OPEB trust, it's going to help that liability number go down. I just want to make that clear. We will put together a plan to start moving that over so that we can help reduce that burden on county departments. All right, CalPERS 0.5% reduction in the discount rate started back in 18-19 and was completed in 2021. That was an 1/8% reduction in the discount rate the first 2 years, and then 1/4% for a total of a 0.5% reduction. That is completed, and it will remain at a 7% discount rate until CalPERS board acts to change it again. All right, so taking just a very high level look at your budget, yes, we have a $124.3 million total budget. Are we actually spending that? No. $21.5 million of that amount is to transfer county funds, as I told you, from one fund to another. It doesn't actually leave the county. So that reduces our net transfer budget to $102.8 million. This is the appropriation that you're approving that has the potential of going out of the county. And as we identify those major portions for jail construction and road, airport projects there, we get down to what is left for county operations is $82.6 million. And this number is a little bit higher than last year's number, and as I mentioned, it's because we're having to increase the level of staff for our new jail coverage. And that's not the only thing, but that's a big portion of it. All right, so here you have general fund revenue. We're looking at $23,021,291. The way we get to that number in this budget is that 46.81% of that is taxes. That would be property tax, sales and use tax, room tax, TOT, those sorts of things. Then you have license and permits. These are the fees for license and permit, well permit, various things like that. Fines and forfeitures would be things that the courts collect that are in code directed to be paid to the county. That's 2.4% of this number. Use of money and property. We anticipate a drop here in that the interest rates have come down, and so we're looking at a 0.5% for interest, but the other thing that's in here is also rents. Rents were down because of COVID. Hopefully rents will go back up as we are able to open back up. Intergovernmental revenues are 12.57% of that total number above. Charges for current services. These would be charges, copy cost, there's a number of things, civil service fees, all kinds of different things that are in here. That's about almost 20%. Miscellaneous revenues account for 2%, and then the transfers in, once again, this is money that's being moved from outside funds to come into the general fund. Most of these are reimbursing budget units that, for example, the sheriff's office may actually spend out of their operating fund in the general fund, and then they go outside to their special revenue funds to say these expenses were for those purposes, and therefore we're transferring money in to handle that. All right, so you can see here that the overall general fund revenue trend is that we in 1920 and above, we started to increase the amount of total revenue that we had. But in our budget, we're seeing that COVID is still having an impact on the flows of these revenues coming in. All right, let me flip to this page here on my notes because I got some more information here on this one for you. All right, so this chart takes basically the previous numbers that you just saw, and it breaks it. You see that there's a dividing line, and hopefully, and it does show up on your screen, there is a red and a salmon color on top. The bottom darker color is discretionary revenue in the general fund. Okay, so what discretionary revenue means is this is where the board has authority to spend this money wherever they so choose. There's no earmarkings or restrictions in law that require this money to be spent in a certain manner. The non-discretionary revenue in the general fund, that's the lighter color that's on top of the darker color. Those revenues have specific purposes for which they must be spent, and therefore we have little direction. You have some direction, but it's within a certain boundary of expenditure types. And so it's important to note and look at what is our discretionary revenue, because that's really where the board has the ability to shift expenditures, if you will, between the different types of functions. You can see that number, that line there, if you draw a line across 21, 22, if you go straight across here, you're going to see for the most part that line is fairly flat. And that's concerning, is that number is not growing more so like this. Okay? You'll see why when we get to the expenditure side. Your property tax apportionment, these percentages have been consistent for as many years as I've been affiliated with Trinity County. For every property tax dollar, the schools get 64 cents of it, the county gets 32 cents, and your special districts that are entitled to property tax share 4%. Here's the general fund expenditure budget. It's $26,744,682. And I know already somebody in their mind ran their numbers and said, hey, CAO, you told me this was a balanced budget. It is a balanced budget. The balance between the difference of the expenditure budget and the revenue budget is made up by available fund balance, or what we call cash carry forward, just to clarify. So within the general fund expenditure budget, I want to point out those three areas we talked about. Public ways and facilities. Remember, on the total budget, it was 30% of the overall total budget, but the general fund only contributes 0.38%. The public assistance budget, which was somewhere in the 18 to 20% range, we only contribute 0.49% of the general fund's discretionary money or expenditure budget goes to that purpose. One of the things that you'll see here is there is no health and human services, no health services area here that we're not contributing to that, but we are. It's kind of buried in this general fund contribution to others, and I've got a slide to break that out. So you're going to see very small amounts going from the general fund to those three functional areas because they're heavily funded by federal and state revenues. The two that we talked about, the two big pieces back there that we talked about, where public protection was about 20% of the overall budget, general government was 13.5% of the total county budget. Those are the major places that we fund in the general fund. So public protection is more than just sheriff, and it's more than the DA, it's more than just law enforcement. It's also recorder. It's also all of those functions that protect the public, not just law enforcement. General fund contributions here to others, 3.76, as I mentioned. I'll break that one out further so you can see where that money is actually going. General government, this number is down because prior year we actually, the jail construction costs were considered general government, even though they're going to benefit the public protection because of the way that our fund structure is built. And our contingency sets up a contingency of almost 2%. And here in education, this is covering library. So the library is funded by the general fund for the most part. All right, so this is the breakout of your general fund contributions to other coming from the general fund. Grab some water, sorry. We are spending, we are sending $294,182 to debt service. We have a requirement here, some of that health realignment money, the health services that we talked about. There's 292, this is a match requirement in code that we have to contribute towards health. That's pretty much all we are contributing towards your health department. The rest of it is federal and state monies. Here we have match requirements on our Office of Emergency Services grants, and those grants do not allow for indirect costs, so we contribute to that to make sure that the fund that holds that information is made whole and we don't have a similar situation that we had in our grant department back several years ago. So the important thing to note here is not only do we have a match requirement to the grant, but the grants do not allow indirect costs. So we need to show that here so it's transparent and you see why that money needs to go. Emergency services indirect cost was an add-on during the budget discussions. Here are the amount of boat taxes that come in to support our lake patrol. That's the number that was provided by the auditor from the property tax system. Workers' compensation reimbursement for the fire departments. Indirect costs not allowed by the lake patrol grant. Many of these grants that we have do not allow for certain expenditures, and so we are showing you here that we're having to use general fund money, discretionary money, to send to them to cover those costs. So these things all are whittling away at what you have the ability to redirect. Here's additional, and you can see the rest of these here. General Assistant for Indigent Care is a requirement in code that county provide for that. This number here, 11,300, this is covering negative interest audit and indirect costs that are not allowed by multiple budget units. I've combined those here in total. PSA 2 area on aging costs, mental health realignment match. So the health realignment match up top and the mental health realignment match, those are the two requirements in code that we must match to qualify for that money. By doing these amounts, it qualifies the county for much more money than that. So it's important that we keep doing that. Here you can see that the Cannabis eradication program does not cover unemployment expenditures that we charge that department because there are staff in there. So this amount has to be covered, and we send it over there to show the total cost of that program. Same here on the Assessor Grant, which I believe this grant will probably wrap up either this year or next year, and so this will fall off the chart in future years. The total that we are contributing from the general fund out these entities is about $1 million. We take that same million and we want to identify which functions are getting that money, because these additional amounts are not in that chart that we looked at. And let me just back up real quick to that chart. In here, it's shown in this pie piece, right? But this chart now helps you to see that there is additional money going to public protection, health and sanitation, debt service, and general government of this amount. And I just wanted to help people to see that that's where it's going. All right, general fund expenditure, 5-year trend. All right, you can see here, this is what raises my concern about our revenues not tracking with our expenditures. So I want to give you a couple of reasons why this is trending up, okay? So if you remember, our discount rate at CalPERS changed beginning in 1819 through 2021. That's these 3 years right here. When your discount rate goes down in your pension actuary reports, your overall liability goes up, which then in turn impacts 2 items. It impacts your PERS rate per 100 of pay to your employees, and it impacts what they call unfunded actuarial liability. The UAL is something that CalPERS is now requiring to be paid up front. That has no bearing on how much the ultimate cost is, except that by paying up front, we do save a small percentage by paying that money up front, because they take and earn interest throughout the year on it to cover that shortfall. But these, as the discount rate went down, it's helping to contribute to these costs going up in your CalPERS. All right, the other item in here, minimum wage began a $1 per hour increase per year up to $15 an hour, and it started right in here somewhere, either 1819 or 1920. And it will continue on, and I have a later slide that'll tell you when it's completed. That increase causes a lot of things, because you think about that and you go, well, how many people do we have at minimum wage? Well, minimum wage sets not only the standard for what you would call entry-level employment, right, which would be what we are all used to as minimum wage, but it also sets, you double that rate to determine what is the minimum pay that you must pay to a supervisory or management position that you have in the county. So not only did it raise some of those lower level employees as far as pay, it also increased some of the lower level management pay positions. So you're getting some increase there. In addition to that, you had your class and comp study and the negotiations, labor negotiations that implemented, well, they have varying increases, but there are some increases that go over 4 or 5 year period. And those also started in this time period of 1920, 2021, and will continue to go out here into the future. One thing that has to be said here is the minimum wage increases and the negotiated labor cost increases will also impact your CalPERS UAL number. So your rate and your UAL will also be impacted. So there's this stacking of this going on to where you'll probably see this trend continue for a while. And it's a little concerning because it's about a 2 million click per year. You see that? The reason it didn't get to 2 million here is we were able to go back to our OPEC actuary and get, and I think that started the implementation mid-year here, but we were able to get that number changed on our ADC to provide about $1 million in savings per year on our 100% funding of ADC. Okay, so the next 2 slides, this slide and the next slide, basically just break out those 5-year trend expenditures by functions to show you the 5-year trend here. So if you start at the bottom, the dark blue, and you go to the orange, and I'm hoping those colors are right because I've been told I'm colorblind, so I'm sorry if they're different for you. This shows the trend as you go up over the same 5 years that we have back here that are going up. You can see that in the case of general government, this one going down. Remember I mentioned that in here was the building of the jail, and there was a large $10 to $12 million expenditure in there for that year. So you're going to see that these, even though it's close here, it's still creeping up. And you're going to see the same thing here with public protection. These are the two largest pieces of the general fund budget. That's why it's, you know, it shows this way. Your library costs are also doing it, but it's a little bit harder to see because of the numbers are so much smaller than these over here. Public assistance is doing the same thing here, creeping up. Public ways, creeping up. This is just the same information turned a different way, so it might be easier for you to see and compare each year for function. So you can see this tracks a little better with that other expenditure report to show you that there is a general trend of costs going up across functions. And that would be consistent with the salary and benefits being some of those costs, and also your service supplies have gone up in certain instances because your providers, your vendors also are incurring these additional costs for minimum wage and different things like that, and they're passing those along to you in services and supplies. Here's a general fund discretionary budget. This is that specific piece. Wondering why that number is so high. Susie, does this include the cash carry forward number?
Yes.
Okay, that's why. Okay, I got a little concerned because my discretionary revenue number is 11.8, somewhere in there,
Yes.
and this is much higher.
That
So
includes the 3.1 million in cash carryover.
it includes the 3.1 cash carryover number, or 3.7 less the contingency number.
Yes.
All right. All right, so in here you can see that the discretionary budget, this is the 11.8 plus the amount of fund balance we're using, which is available fund balance in the general fund, not restricted fund balance in the general fund. That's why it's considered discretionary. It means we didn't spend all of the money that we had discretionarily set aside, or for some reason departments didn't spend it. It rolls back into the fund balance to be spent in the next year. So that's what that number is, of 14,929,070. You can see that the largest portion of that is going towards public protection. Once again, that's not just law enforcement, but it definitely is the largest expenditure of our discretionary money. And that's mainly because there aren't a lot of funding opportunities from the federal and state to support this function. There are many, and we are participating in many for the Sheriff's Department, the DA, the law enforcement side, but the other public protection functions do not get a ton of support from federal and state monies. General government cost here is 20% of that number, and you can see once again that these track right on. And this is that $1 million we've already broke out. So just kind of get the picture of your discretionary is funding those things that are the large ticket items. So of this discretionary budget, who are your managers in your county that are handling this money? Well, obviously the biggest player here is the sheriff at 40.5% of this money is in sheriff budget units. What that means is sheriff, jail, coroner, all of those budget units that are within the general fund that the sheriff is the budget officer amount to 40.5% of what we're sending discretionary money to. The other large players here are auditor controller, county administrative officer, district attorney, and your chief probation officer. You can see the others though that are here as well. All right, so this chart really helps to see if you're a picture person versus the narrative person, right? So you can see on the left that we have non-general fund budget is 97.5 million, general fund budget 26.7. Those of you with calculators out there, I'm certainly hoping that that adds to 124 million, which I believe it does. And then the circle over here breaks out just this general fund piece so that you can see that this discretionary money of 11,815,085, this is actually discretionary revenues that we anticipate collecting during the fiscal year. These are non-discretionary revenues that we're expecting to receive during the fiscal year. And this is the cash carryover balance going in to that, to make that total general fund budget. All right, debt service. We need to talk about what debt service we have. We have the refunding or the refinancing of the 2005 COPs. We call that the 2018 Umpqua Bank. We have Motorola CAD dispatch system. This is the sheriff's new dispatch system, and I think a case management system as well within it. And then we have the Trinity PUD project agreement that stemmed from the, as you can see, 05 was not a good year for Trinity County. We had to do some mitigation to keep the county moving forward. And so the total payments that are budgeted in the current year are $724,404 to meet all of our debt requirements for fiscal year 21-22. Here you can see initially on the Umpqua Bank refinancing, we borrowed $2.3 million at 3% interest rate, which is much lower than it was before as the COP. And then our outstanding balance is $1.7 million. That 1.6 of that million is principal, the rest of it is interest. And our annual payment is $434,000. And we've already paid $24,548, which is an interest payment in July of this year, of 21. The anticipated payoff, and these are key on all three of these debts. You're going to see that we're anticipating the final payoff in January of 2025, which is just around the corner. Motorola CAD, we entered into a lease for $982,000 at an interest rate of 3.69. As we said, the lease is for the new dispatch system. Our outstanding balance at the beginning of this fiscal year is $561,000. The principal is $513,000 of that, and our annual payment is $140,000 per year. It's due March 30th of each year. Our payoff, March 2025. And then our 2004-2005 Trinity PUD project agreement, we borrowed $2 million for the, I believe it was for the bailout of the hospital, and then interest rate variable based on our LAIF rate, which some years is higher than others. Now currently it's much lower than last year. And our outstanding balance here is down to $265,000 from the initial $2 million. Our annual payments and our agreement with Trinity PUD is to not exceed $150,000 in payments per year. So we have estimated that our approximate payoff will be June 2023. So all three of our existing debt instruments, this one will be paid off in June. So basically next fiscal year. And the others will be paid off in 2025. So what's happening now? Well, jail construction is going to be completed, or if it's not completed already, it will be completed. And then the state reimbursements will continue up to our full amount of our grant from them. And then the sheriff has already started hiring and training that additional staff needed to properly staff the jail so that we are not subject to horrible penalties, which many counties have already incurred for not properly staffing their new jails. And we have road projects that will continue to be done, repairing storm damage from previous emergencies. We've talked about the CalPERS discount rate, so I won't continue to do that. Just want to point out here under the OPEB that we successfully paid the full 100% in 2019-2020. We did it again in 2021, and we are budgeting for the full amount in 21-22. And you can see that that amount is 6.25 million. And approximately half of this amount covers the county's pay-as-you-go cost, which is the actual outflow for your retiree health insurance. The other half is being deposited with the irrevocable OPEB trust fund. So although it is gathered into the ISF fund, it's being immediately transferred over to the PARS OPEB trust fund. Revenue opportunities. I know that you are working on these, and some of these have gone forward. I just continue to put them on here to show that the amount of revenue that they would bring in and would be helpful to fund the budget. It's up to you whether these go forward or not. We are working still on the county fee study. COVID definitely threw a wrench into that. Fiscal year 22-23 expenditures. We definitely need to, and we did somewhat in this budget, focus on some of the deferred building maintenance that we were doing for the last 5 to 10 years in our budgets, and we need to address them before we have large expenditure items. So some of those are in here, and they will continue in future budgets to get caught up. Increased ongoing operating expenditures required for the new jail. When you get a larger jail, there's an ongoing cost to commit to funding that to have proper staffing levels. So that's something that we'll have in the future. We need to develop a plan to address our net pension obligation with CalPERS. I think that because you have, in labor negotiations, changed your OPEB benefit going forward with new hires, that at some point we will get some relief from the OPEB costs and being able to set aside into the irrevocable trust to fund those future costs will free up some money in our budget in the future to be able to maybe perhaps look at meeting with PARS on their dual nature trust of pension and OPEB combination trust, which means we could set money aside in advance to help stabilize our PERS costs. The concern I have with this, and the reason that it needs to be discussed further, is you can't, I don't want to say can't. I don't believe that we're going to be successful in getting the federal and state to revenue sources to help contribute towards a fund of that nature. So this set aside might only be for the general fund departments. And the importance of that, though, is the general fund departments and your discretionary money not growing. These impacts us in the general fund much more than it does those that are funded by federal and state monies that pay for the services they need done, or should pay for the services that they need done. The fourth bullet here is consideration of a new sheriff administration building adjacent to the new jail site. This would be looking into the feasibility of that. If any of you have actually gone down to our old sheriff building and jail, I was able to do that probably within this last year, and they're due for a new facility. Class and comp implementation will continue, as we talked about, through 24-25 fiscal year. That will continue the expenditure trend up as those increases occur. That's the end of my presentation, and with that, I will open for any questions that you might have.
All right, any members of the board have
is there any pay down of the hospital loan that we have loaned to ourselves? I believe it's 3.5 million or 3 million.
No, you're talking about the negative cash and what we have
Yeah.
the hospital fund?
Yes.
No, that amount still remains. We do have a plan that as those debt instruments come off for the PUD and for the COP 205 refunding that's with UMPLA, that we're looking to see that those would continue to pay down that negative amount in the hospital fund. That has not been solidified, but that would be, I think, a feasible plan to, once those debts are completed in 2003 and 2005, that we start using that money to start getting rid of that negative cash in the hospital fund. That's at least my plan, and I'm open to other suggestions as well.
Okay. For those other board members, that's negative cash that basically we loaned ourselves money back in 2005 for 3 million something or other. COVID monies, is there still COVID monies coming in, or are those all, or do you have those in the budget, or what's going on with COVID monies?
We do have the ARP funds that are coming in. We have not yet developed a plan on how we can spend those in accordance with the regulations. Richard and I's thought was that we're gonna, once we get through budget, then we're gonna look at the guidelines that came out from the Department of Treasury and start the discussions on what are the allowable expenses, and then I believe bring that to you guys to provide us some direction and input on that.
So those aren't budgeted in?
They're not budgeted, there's no expenditures budgeted for that at this point in time. We wanted to develop the plan and bring that to you, and then we'll bring a budget adjustment. Or at that point in time, then we would ask for authorization to approve the necessary budget adjustments to make those expenditures in accordance with your direction.
Okay, what about opioid monies? Is since that's not solidified, is it the same sort of issue?
I'm not privy to any information on opioid monies.
I think it's still pending in the court case.
I understand it's still pending, but is okay. So that's obviously not budgeted.
I wasn't made aware yet. We haven't had any discussions that there's monies coming for that, but it would be a similar situation. I need to figure out what we can spend them on, what are our allowable uses, and then we would bring that back for a budget adjustment at a later date and time to appropriate those funds.
The fee studies, I think the goal was to have them completed by now, but what's the plan now?
We have about, Susie, you're gonna have to help me with the percentages, but either half or just over half of the department's responses. We're waiting on some of the larger departments. We have met with one of them recently, I want to say a month ago, maybe a couple weeks ago, to give them what we need and give them a little time to put that together. And so we will meet with them again once we have that information. We are discussing, Susie and I and Richard, on whether we need to bring you what we have quicker and then work on those that are still responding so that we can at least get part of the fees increased. But we haven't made a final decision on that yet.
Yeah, I'd say I think we have probably just under half of the departments. And it's the larger ones that really need those fee studies that are buried with other things that they haven't been able to get us the information that we need so we can complete that. And it was about a month ago, or maybe 6 weeks ago, that we met with them. We need to follow up. But it's hard because they have some other priorities that they were directed to work on as well. So it's balancing all of the number one priorities.
So do we anticipate having those done by the end of the year? Say we chose to do the whole package at once, would that be at the end of the year?
The whole package at once, yeah, would be closer to the end of the year. We're really hopeful that we can get a couple of them done and to you by January-ish.
A
To
couple
get
of
the
them.
first part of it done, so we can get some of them moving forward, and some of those departments that need fee increases can start receiving those increased fees, and then we're gonna push on those department heads. The hard part is we're waiting on information from other people that we can't move forward with creating that fee schedule until we get that information.
So what you're saying is you'd have all the raw data in by the end of the year, but you wouldn't have it calculated to us until January, February?
Okay, so I'm sorry, I think I work on a fiscal year basis, so by end of the year, I thought you meant
Okay,
end of
I'm
fiscal
sorry.
year.
Oh,
My bad.
okay. All right. Now, I understand, it's all clear to me. So the end of the year is June 30th. Yeah. So we would start seeing some of those.
We're hoping to start seeing some of those moving forward sooner rather than later. And I'm thinking that we're probably gonna, it's not ideal because I don't like to have a increased fee discussion meeting after meeting after meeting. But I'm thinking we're likely gonna have to start trickling those in so that way that some departments can start increasing and not be held back because other departments were unable to get us information because of their workloads.
So my understanding, Cannabis is not in this round.
Correct.
And when is that going to put in? Maybe I'm putting you on the spot. Maybe that's a Richard question.
We need to have further discussions, I think, on that, on when that's going to fit in. We have the focus for me is the general fund departments that need fee increases because, as Craig mentioned, our general fund revenues are stagnant and our general fund expenditures are rising exponentially. So my priority is general fund departments that need fee increases. But we can talk about that. I can work with Richard and find out what his desires are and your desires are.
Well, you don't want to know my desires on how that fee study should go, but I think, Richard, that's something that, I know there's 27 top priorities in cannabis, but
Yeah, that's one of those catch-22s. We need assistance from the staff in cannabis to do the fee study, but the cannabis staff has 5 different priorities, and one right now is the latest one is the transition plan, and I see Kim just showed up, which means she's taken time away from the transition plan to get into the board. So it's just one of those catch-22. We need it to increase fees, but we need staff to clear the projects. But if we have the fees done, we may have other staff to assist them. So it is a priority, and we're doing all that we can without pulling staff away from other mandated or priorities. So understood.
okay.
So,
Yeah, I'm done for now, thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sure. So Richard, as we move forward with our 2 new consulting companies, will that help out with the fee study since we'll know hour by hour, day by day what we're charged?
It will, as they go through, because they're going to break down the amount of hours they spend on each aspect of that particular assignment that they're doing. I mean, it won't help us with the individuals in the field and law enforcement, those types of, but as they review the applications, review the Appendix C, they will break it down per hour, well, it's probably per minute at their cost, and we'll be able to take those. We won't associate the cost because our hourly cost is much higher than ours, but we'll be able to associate the amount of time. So if it takes 22.6 hours to review a typical application, we can take that and put that in, and it'll be, Craig will have that as far as what that portion of the application costs in the county. So yes, the long answer is yes.
The other hard part about doing a cannabis fee study right now is the program is in a transition, and it's hard to do a fee study on a program that's not set. If we're going to transition to, and I believe I heard this during yesterday's board meeting, considering transitioning to a more of a consultant model, then those fees are going to be different than if we have in-house staff, because the fees for the consultant are different than they are for in-house staff.
And just to go back to Keith's first question about the hospital loan that we have out. As we sunset our first one, which I think is PUD, that will automatically jump over to the hospital. The second one, I think there was 3 of them that amounted up to about $500,000 annually.
Yeah, so it won't automatically happen. We'll have to bring that back to you in a budget and make sure that you agree to the plan to do that.
Is that the plan as of present?
That would be a recommendation,
But-
yes.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation. You guys are the authoritarians on making the plan. We would recommend it, and right now that's my recommendation to Richard and to Susie, and then we would have a discussion on that to determine if we needed to bring that forward to you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Excuse me, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, not public comment yet.
We're not doing the public comment yet, John.
I wonder when.
John, it's not time for public comment yet, we haven't called for that.
I know, I'm just wondering when it might be.
As soon as the supervisors are done asking questions. Supervisor Fraser, do you have any questions?
I have one question for Susie that just kind of, I don't understand how it works. We had the undergrounding funding that I believe it was in May. And Supervisor Gross brought it up at that time that money should go to District 5. My question is, how do we know where that money is? Or is that in a separate fund? Does that go to general fund?
Those monies, when those credits are sold, go into the discretionary general fund.
Okay, so
So
there's really no way to keep that money separate.
Not the way it's currently set up.
Okay.
Yeah, there are discretionary general fund dollars and they currently roll into our general fund. We can have discussion and at the pleasure of the board that you can direct that they go, that we use that amount of general fund for a specific purpose. But at this point, we've had to use all of our general fund dollars to balance our budget and our cash carryover.
All right, thank you. I was curious. I didn't see any specific item.
Any additional questions from supervisors? Keith, you asked some of the ones I was thinking of.
I'm curious, how many staff hours does it take to prepare this budget and report? Is there an estimate?
When we started, when?
I start preparing the budget development packet in February and March. And I get that out to departments by early April. Usually give them about 6 weeks to prepare their budgets and submit them back to us. And then we go through each department's requested budget and review them and analyze them. And then we prepare for department meetings. And I don't know that I could give you a staff hours time even for just myself, let alone all the other staff that are included in the process at this point, right now on the fly.
It's likely thousands.
Likely, it takes us from April through now. Now granted that I'm not solely working on budget, but there's a good portion of my time between April and September that is budget focused.
Yeah.
And that's just me. That doesn't include Richard's time and our consultant's time and then our department head's time, who also have to put a lot of time and energy into their preparing their budgets and then meeting with us and discussing them and answering questions for us and all of that good stuff.
And it's a team effort from each of the departments, and department heads or fiscal staff and our management staff. So the amount of time they spend behind the scenes is significant. So yeah, it would be very difficult. But I would say, just a rough estimate, that probably 15% of everybody's time is spent on creating a budget. So when you do 2,080 hours times 300 people. Well, not all 300, but I mean the fiscal staff, the department heads, directors. So I mean, it's a significant amount of time spent on creating the budget.
And is the data all in a common software that kind of goes between departments, or does everything kind of have to get summarized and written and then re-entered by you?
It's re-entered. We send out a budget development packet that's in Excel to all of our departments, and that's what they use to create their requested budgets. We then review that, and then extract the data from there, and then upload it into our accounting software.
Thank you, Susie.
And then take it into that, it's not only a creation of a budget, it's to manage it. We have to monitor it constantly, and we send out, we have, different percentages during the year. We're at 25% during the year, and we can review to see that, okay, maybe some expenditures are at 35% or 25% the year, or same thing with revenues. So it's a year-round.
I noticed the Auditor Controller received the Government Finance Officers Association Certificate of Excellence in Finance Reporting. Only 4% of the nation's government entities receive this award, so congratulations.
They do an excellent job.
Unless there's any additional questions?
I just had a comment from the new board members, and you've probably already done this, but a lot of this stuff is kind of overwhelming, especially your first year, and if you haven't sat down with Susie and gone over with it, or you have any questions, she can really help you out understanding, and Craig also. My first year, I had the advantage of sitting on the budget committee, which was really overwhelming, but at least you learn stuff pretty fast. So there's a lot of acronyms that still nobody quite understands.
All right.
Yeah, and I think it was helpful for myself and Jill. I don't think Dan was there because he was on the planning commission, but last year we had a oversight of the budget meetings prior to this time, and I think that was really helpful for us. So I would continue that with new incoming members.
Well, with that, we can open up to the floor of public comment.
Terrence Mines, Junction City. It has to do with the cannabis licensing fees. Obviously, you guys have got another reason why we don't have these. So actually, I'd like a breakdown of all the money spent, not just this last year, last 5 years. We have litigation costs. I need to know how many cases there are. I need to know how much money was brought into the program each year from licenses, because license money only pays for licensing. I'd like to know how much money was given to the police for the abatement. Specifically, we'd like to know how much money was recovered from all the abatement fines, where that money went and how that money was spent. Let me see here. We'd like to know how many cases of litigation are currently the money for cannabis is being spent on, and the breakdown for each case. And are you prepared for the outcome of the litigation too? Where does that money come from? Does it come from the cannabis fund, or is it going to come from the general fund where you collected all the abatement money using our cannabis funds to go do this? Because you're spending a lot of money, but we don't have licenses that are correct yet. And you're out spending it on things that most of us cannabis farmers now are very concerned about. We've asked for this fee study for year after year after year, and now you're telling us that we're going to go into some crazy new program thing and you're not going to have fee studies. Well, you've collected money, you've spent money, that's all documented. We'd like all of that now. I think everybody is entitled to know where all of our money is. We don't have licenses that are correct. You've spent a lot on litigation, and I think everyone in the county should see if they're paying for that with general fund liability money or if that's cannabis money. I think you bought a building, no one's in it yet. We'd like to know about that, because we've heard about the staffing and how much money is actually being spent on cannabis staff. And we heard yesterday that you're going to hire some more people, but with what money, and how do you justify that if you don't know really how the licensing works? Because from what we all understood in the beginning of this is, when you collect money for a license, it's specifically to license us, and that's it. Okay? If there's processes involved, then that's part of it, but we never get any breakdown of this. And yesterday I was specifically told to come here and ask budget questions. Well, You guys already explained you don't have the answers. Well, why would I have come here if you don't have all the answers? So I think at this point it'd be pretty important for this county to hire a forensic accountant, bring them in, an accounting firm, and clearly go through these books once and for all.
Good morning, Justin Hawkins. So I've never had a chance to come in here. I rearranged my schedule a couple times this month to come in here because I've been told in the past that we're not allowed to discuss budget items or funding outside of this hearing. So I've decided to come today to talk to you guys about the situation here. I'm not sure, most of you haven't been here the whole time. I have been here for the whole time of the cannabis program at least. And having been through all the discussions, I have no idea still how code enforcement is related to our program for cannabis. It's not directly related to site visits for license holders. We're talking about the license holders paying fees into the cannabis fund that are then transferred over to the sheriff's office to conduct code enforcement on parcels other than their own. Parcels where they have no control over what goes on. And what's even more amazing is that the money that's generated from those fines is transferred directly to the general fund. It's used to support other things. Last year, it was used in large part to support the finishing of the jail. I don't believe that's a lawful use of funds from cannabis. And it's certainly unethical. And it's very unfair. I can't seem to find anybody who I explain it to that thinks it's a good idea. Maybe you guys think it's lawful and it's totally fine and it's reasonable. But I think it's stealing pretty much from the program. It resembles a tax almost, but we never passed it as a tax, so I guess it's a fee, but the fee study's never been completed either. And when the fee study is completed, if they think that code enforcement should be paid for out of those fees, well, the fee study's worthless. It's gonna have a giant hole in it. And honestly, at this point, yeah, I agree with a lot of other people who spoke over the last couple of weeks about this matter. The fee money should come back to the program right now. Everything that was ever sent out of the program for non-administration of the program. I pushed forever to ask that this be included in the program. And I was told at planning commission hearings, board meetings, everywhere, that code enforcement is not part of the program. In fact, it's specifically explained in the EIR, in the notice of preparation comments to the water board. The lead agency says it's not part of our program. That was what was explained last year here when we finished the EIR. Not part of the program. So I don't know why money would be transferred out. And this is, I'll be honest, nothing against the sheriff or the sheriff's office. I think they're great guys. But this was an inherited situation, and I ask that it stops right now. No more money transferred out of the cannabis program for anything other than getting licenses issued. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment from within the room?
Okay, I guess we don't want answers.
Richard, are you interested in commenting on any of that?
Would you like to start this discussion or just leave, or do we have several people on for public comment?
I feel like we're going to hear the same types of questions.
Well, I think that maybe, and every year I request this, and every year we give it, and I think maybe we should go over the cannabis budget now, close public comment, and then reopen it afterwards, because a lot of these questions that have been thrown out there may be answered in this. This has been very transparent, and I'm very glad we had people actually ask some questions. I believe that several of Mr. Mines, if they're still in the building, questions are ones that are going to have to be answered through a FOIA or whatever process to get back data. But we are here to answer all the questions for this upcoming budget and go very in depth on this. And I'm sure you're prepared because I ask this question every year. So that's my request, Chair, is that we go over the cannabis budget and then come back to public.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I don't know who's gonna lead that, is that Craig, Susie, or?
Well, why don't we start, I think, we have county council, sorry, I have county council on Zoom, and they can explain the legalities of using cannabis fees for enforcement. So I think that's a good place to start. That seems to be one of the trigger points.
Okay.
Two people have asked most questions about the building. You're good.
And,
Well, we hope they're outside listening, but this is the MO of how this works.
is that going to Margaret, or is there another?
I think Sean is on.
Okay.
Yeah, Sean Cameron, Deputy County Counsel.
Hey, Sean, you have the floor. I don't know if you've been listening to everything.
I have.
Okay.
So the use of these fees for code enforcement is based on the Trinity County Code, section 17.43.90, which establishes that a cannabis cultivation program fee is to be collected from applicants, and such fees to generate sufficient revenue to cover the cost of enforcement. This is part of a holistic approach of addressing the negative impacts of cannabis cultivation in the county, and is allowed under Article 13C of the California Constitution, which establishes that a charge may be imposed for the reasonable regulatory costs to a local government or administrative enforcement. So it's allowed both in the local code and under the California Constitution.
And when you say enforcement, is that enforcement of the cannabis program or just general sheriff enforcement broadly?
It's enforcement of the program, but from the county's perspective, part of the program is getting the cultivation of cannabis into the program and punishing and finding people who are not entering into the program and are cultivating anyway.
Thank you, Sean. Are there any questions from the board?
I'll have a statement, a historical statement on that. So one of the concepts is to, it's unfair for a licensed cultivator to have to compete against an unlicensed cultivator because they have a lot of costs that deal with. So part of the program is to punish or try to attempt to level the playing field of this, and so I think it's a very justified cost. Now, I will say that I think and I've bantied this around several times, that a percentage of the fines and fees should go back in and benefit the legal growers somehow. I've bantied around that a percentage of the fees go directly into pay for code enforcement, thus would lower the amount every year for the legal growers. Unfortunately, we haven't got there, but I think that's a fair statement, or a fair gripe that they have. But I also think it's very important that we, and benefits the legal growers to attack their competitors that aren't playing the same game.
Yeah, and I think we need to be real careful that we differentiate between fees and fines. Fees are collected for the program to support the program and all aspects associated with that program, which aren't, we hear it all the time, we need to run county like a business. Well, we are a multi-conglomerate, large business that has a HR department, that has an accounting department, that has a general services department, that has to pay for. So those also are part of supporting the program, because HR, we need HR to hire staff. We need a legal team to defend in lawsuits or when we write contracts. So those things are appropriate, and those are part of our fee structure. Now the fines, with any fines that we collect in the county, those go into a general fund and our discretion of the board to appropriate them as to where they want them to go. So if the board were to direct that a portion of the fines collected go back into the program, that's your discretion, and that's something that you give direction to staff to do so. Up until now, we haven't had that direction, so that they go into general fund and they're used a lot of times to offset some negative balances, and one is, they're absolutely correct, we used last year to offset the deficit we were having in the building of jail, because we chose we did not want to have debt for the the jail is done, we want it to be paid for, and so we were able to use those. So we'll just gotta be careful that we keep the difference between fines and fees separate.
So that'd be like abatement fines.
Yes.
So to be clear, if I misspoke about, I'm referring to the fines that a percentage of
That's
that.
what I assumed, I just wanted to.
Yes,
clarify.
so that, just to be clear, it's fines that I would like us to look at to come up with a way, because not all, as we'll see, that a lot of that fines or the code enforcement is funded through cannabis to attack other illegal cannabis.
Any other questions from board members?
Craig, to go through line by line?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I don't know if Craig's prepared to go through their line by line.
Or you've got one of these you want to?
Actually, we would usually have the department head come and speak on their specific line-by-line budget because they're going to have more details than I do. I would just address one of the other public comments as far as what the fee is being spent on and all the requests that were out there. The budget unit number is 8239 for cannabis. Susie, do you recall the fund? Is the fund number 239?
It is, and it's on page one, it starts on page 120 in your proposed budget book.
And so all
Nope, I apologize, it starts on page 119 in your proposed budget books.
all of the fees that are generated by the cannabis program go into this budget unit and that fund, and the expenditures that come out of there are all in that fund as well. So everything is kept in this fund and is audited every year by our external auditor as part of the county. So I just addressed that a little bit there.
So you're saying that this already has been independently audited and has been passed through as being legitimate, is that correct?
Yes, it's been audited and found to be, you have positive opinions or, I keep changing the terminology on the opinion, but the opinion is the highest that you can have on financial statements, otherwise you wouldn't get that GFOA award. And then it seemed like some of those questions were a lot more specific than maybe included in an audit report or your CAFR report, and those would require a further request, if you will, written request with details, because we may not have things broke down by, I think he talked about cases. I'm not familiar with that kind of breakdown in our accounting system, to be honest.
That would be information we'd probably need to get through county council for the number of citations that are issued and cases that go to litigation. That's all stuff that we're gonna have to get through council.
So from previous years, the recommendation, and I'm asking this as a question, would be to ask for public information with specific questions and submit that.
Yes, we can provide a printout from our system. It's called a detailed trial balance, and it will show every expenditure and revenue line item that was ever charged against the account for a specific time period. That's pretty easy to generate and doesn't take a lot. And we can provide that to anybody that wants it. It's going to show who was paid and how much they were paid. It'll show if it was an internal payment to another department, it's going to show the journal entry number. And we can provide all that document. That's all public information. It's stuff that they can request, but we've not gotten formal requests for it.
So the process would be to contact who?
Hey, Susie, do you think that if we know that this is information that a number of people want, we could proactively print out that report in a PDF and put it somewhere where they can download it off your website, and it saves staff time from having to respond to 20 or 50 different requests?
Yes.
That would be something we'd want to run by county council to make sure that they're fine with that, but
yeah, we can vet that through county council and then work with Kim and the cannabis department's website and potentially print it to PDF and post the detailed trial balance every year once the books are closed. So we wouldn't be able to do the 2021 final because those books are not closed yet, and I wouldn't want to put it out there as final without the books being closed, but we can give them a year-to-date, and we can have it posted on their website. They can go and look at it at their convenience.
We could get 19 and 20 up, and yep, we need 19.
I would appreciate that. I'm just one person on the board here, but
I would also.
I'll work with Kim and County Council to confirm that they have no concerns about us doing that, and then we'll get it posted. Hopefully by we should be able to get it done by the next board meeting, and so that way that you can report out, or we can report out if possible.
okay.
I'm kind of speaking for Kim, sorry Kim.
Okay, I don't have much to do.
I'll help you.
So to be clear, what we're going through is the proposed budget from
Would you
this
like,
year.
would you like the proposed budget, or would you like the actuals from last year? Because that will show exactly what was spent, that money wasn't transferred in or out, and there wasn't, so I mean.
Well, can we do both? I mean,
Okay, yeah,
this
we got
has been a sore subject
Agreed.
I don't know, we have a lot of staff here waiting for us to go through this. I don't know if we want to, if we have questions of or they're so fascinated in cannabis, they want to sit here and
It is the most important thing in the county, so, yeah. Well, I know we're gonna have, I can anticipate that public comment won't encompass other departments, so, I kind of think we just flow with the way we're going.
Or could we do a public comment for any department, ask if there's any public comments on any departments other than cannabis? Then we could move those departments through, ask the board if they had any questions. Then other departments can move through and get back to their
Okay, so
800 number one item
a
priorities.
better idea. So if we want to open public comment up, back to anything but cannabis.
And then we'll go through cannabis.
That sounds good to me. So if there's anyone on Zoom that would like to make public comment on departments not related to cannabis department, this is your chance to do so.
I have no raised hands and no new chats.
John Brower.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
It may make sense to wrap the sheriff's code enforcement budget into the larger cannabis conversation also. They seem related.
So would you like to make a comment on this now?
That's your 3 minutes.
The sheriff's enforcement.
No, but I think, it'd be good if the sheriff and sheriff's code enforcement budget was also wrapped into the larger cannabis conversation. The conversations are so intertwined, it may make sense to do them together.
Is there something else that we didn't touch on earlier during the enforcement explanation?
Well, only that the enforcement explanation was lacking the tie-in with environmental protection. And, Justin Hawkins brought up that the enforcement is not considered part of the program in the environmental impact report. But if enforcement is part of the program and is funded by the program, there must be an environmental impact. Perhaps it's a positive benefit to environmental quality. But there's definitely an environmental impact. It's part of the conversation, and so as you get into the cannabis subject, I think it may make sense to discuss that also as a separate item as you're going through the stack.
All right, is there any other public comment on departments other than cannabis?
I have no raised hands and no new chats.
All right, and then are there department heads wishing to make comment or do presentations on any of their budgets?
Good morning, Board Chair, Tim Saxon, Sheriff. I will stick around later for additional conversation with regard to cannabis. I would like to talk briefly about my budget. As was many times pointed out by Craig, yes, I am the biggest consumer of the general fund. Have been and will continue to be, and for rightly so. I mean, we provide a lot of service for the people of Trinity County, and I'm proud of that. And I have a great organization, and I'm proud of the work that they do. One of the things that I would like to bring up is in my proposed budget, I did ask for 2 additional administrative positions, and I just wanted to go on record today to basically talk about those 2 positions and to ask, well, we have a balanced budget today. I would ask for your consideration that in the future, should additional funding become available or some funding through savings become available, I would ask that the Sheriff's Office be considered at the top of the priority for funding an additional position. And if I may go through some of the reasons for that. The Sheriff's Office is one of the largest departments in Trinity County. And we currently are allocated 61 full-time positions. For those 61 full-time positions, I have 2 administrative positions to handle and process all the paperwork that goes through our office. And we require the same basic timekeeping and benefits work that every other employee in the county, plus specialized requirements that are unique to law enforcement. These include overtime tracking for emergency operations due to natural disasters, such as the fires that we've been going through for the last 2 months. Workers' compensation issues that apply to peace officers, and a whole bunch of other things that are really specific to the Sheriff's Office. And the sheer increases in the numbers of disasters in the last few years, as well as increased reporting requirements from federal and state agencies, has added to an already heavy workload for the current administrative staff. And over the last 10 years, the number of contracts that the Sheriff's Office oversees has increased from 4 to over 100. The number of contracts will grow as the new detention facility opens in the near future. And additional contracts are required for increased services for a larger inmate population. The time required for project management for these numerous contracts increases exponentially as the level for oversight for state and federal compliance increases. And additionally, over the last couple of years, we've been able to gather or gain 2 rather significant grants that require 1/2 of a full-time equivalent position for administration. And so that further reduces the amount of time that my 2 admin staff have to complete their duties. So one of the other things is my administrative services officer has been shifted to more contract and financial responsibilities, especially because of the ever-increasing inmate medical incidents that we've had and costs. Just over the last 2 years, the number of catastrophic inmate medical incidents have increased, requiring hospitalization and requiring the ASO to spend many hours with healthcare and insurance providers to review claims and negotiate reductions in costs, thereby saving the county tens of thousands of dollars in expenses. However, this has reduced the time that the ASO can spend performing support duties for the sheriff and undersheriff. And this has caused some delays in us responding to outside agencies for things. And we did a basic survey of other departments, and not to put any of my other brothers and sisters department heads on the display here, but our ratio is currently 1 to 31 for employees. Of the other departments, the lowest is 1 to 3, the next highest is 1 to 10. So I feel this is unacceptable to have 2 employees doing the work that other departments have 5 or 10 staff to complete. My current staff members are dedicated. They work extra hours to complete these missions with no complaints. But I really feel this can't continue. So that's why I really would ask that the consideration be given for an additional couple of admin staff, especially I've got it here, hold on. My various notes here. Admin coordinator, and I did receive funding for an account tech, which will be helpful, but I really need an additional position of an admin coordinator. And working up some numbers, the basic numbers, and this was if we were to get this as of October, would be an annual cost for this fiscal year of approximately $59,404. Realizing that by the time consideration is given, we'd be further along in the fiscal year, and that cost would be reduced. Anyway, I just wanted to speak to that point. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the support that you've given to the Sheriff's Office for our previous budgets, and that's all I have to say. Do you have any questions?
Any questions from the board?
So Tim, you have, do you still have a code enforcement administrator or in-house person?
I have one records tech that is funded by the code enforcement program.
Okay. But that's not the two that you're talking about?
That is correct. That is not considered part. I have an administrative services officer and a business manager.
Okay, that is counting the business manager.
Correct. Those are the two positions that I'm talking about.
Okay. And that's not an evidence tech, because that's part of...
That's separately.
Okay, all right. Just trying to grasp it.
Right. These are the two individuals that process all the paperwork, dealing with HR, dealing with benefits, dealing with timekeeping, all my billing, claims, the paperwork that basically just keeps the office running.
Okay.
Once we go to the new facility, it's obviously going to be an off-site facility, so that's going to be even harder to keep track of going to a separate facility to keep that paperwork rolling, plus the increase in inmate staff and increase in actual work staff that will be at the new facility. All those required reports have to get back over to our office, have to be processed.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Would the board like to direct admin to work with the sheriff to see if we can find those funds to assist them in filling that position?
Are there any objections from the board? Seeing none?
Okay, we'll work with the sheriff and do all we can to assist him in funding that position.
Can I ask for clarification that that's not before we prepare the final budget for adoption by this board on Monday?
Correct.
Or is that?
My understanding.
Lunch? Okay.
My understanding is after the adoption of the final budget, we'll work with the sheriff and look for additional revenues or cost savings to assist him in funding that position. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to clarify, make sure we didn't need it.
Can I just add something quickly? It's Craig Goodman, budget consultant. Normally, because we've used all of our available fund balance to prepare this budget, in order to identify another position, we would have to find additional revenues or new revenues that we didn't have in this budget to support that, as there technically isn't any fund balance available to cover it. So if you really want that position in place, we would need to cut it somewhere else. We're in a zero-sum game here and have been for quite some time in Trinity County.
Understood.
Any additional questions or comments? All right, so we can move on. And it sounds like there were no other department heads in the room that we're going to report out on the budget. So this will be the chance to do so. All right, then I guess we can go back to any pending public comments on cannabis if they're still out on Zoom.
We're going to have to do a quick walkthrough of our budget.
Oh, okay.
I did have a question that may be relevant to both cannabis and this. Was there any budget for the cannabis tax?
At this time, no.
I thought it was in there 120,000 as recommended or requested or something. There's 120,000.
It's correct.
There was 120,000 that was put into as estimated, and that was put in to offset an expenditure that was added to the administrative budget to start working on site plan development for the potential sheriff's administration center. So essentially, if that tax revenue doesn't come in, then we're not going to get to start working on that potential project. So that was only added as it's an offset to, if we get the revenue, then we can start looking at the sheriff's admin center. If we don't, then we're going to need to do some larger planning to.
So 120,000 has been spoken for if money materializes.
If money materializes, yes. Yeah, the first 120,000.
So if there was more taxes collected from that revenue pocket, would that be money that could potentially go towards the sheriff's 2 new hires, or no?
Yes.
Correct, but my understanding is it's only one, because one of those positions that he's requested is already recommended for funding in the budget before you today.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that.
No, that's okay.
All right. And then, so what's Kim taking over?
It's Kim's turn.
Oh, no.
It is, let me make sure
So for people following at home, it's page 119.
Correct.
Okay, so page 119 is,
We're closer.
yeah, a little closer and mask off. Okay, so 119, page 119 of the budget is the estimated revenues. And this shows the actuals of 2019 and 20, the actuals of 2021 so far, and then the recommended budget for 21-22. And so 6155 is transportation permits. The recommended budget for this year for revenue for this fiscal year is $4,000. The actuals last year were around $4,000. Zoning and variance permits, expected revenue is $40,000. Cannabis permits, expected revenue is $2 million. Nursery fees, nursery inspection fees, cannabis distribution fees, non-storefront retail, and manufacturing licenses. We do not have estimates on those. They can vary greatly, and so there is nothing listed in the recommended budget for those fees.
Then the actuals for 2021 doesn't have anything in there except for the non-storefront retail?
Right.
Is that because there were none, or just the finances weren't reported, or did we lose licensees?
They'd be reported. There were none received.
Okay.
So you're estimating $2 million in permits, but that would be based on what we discussed yesterday, and that's if we get all the Appendix Cs through and the program's functioning.
Correct. For renewals, there are some questions about renewals for those licenses that have been issued. At this time, we are accepting renewals when they come up on their anniversary date, but we're only accepting half of the fee rather than the $6,000. For example, for a type 2, that's like the initial application fee, where the total fee for a 10,000 type 2 small license is $5,000, and then the applicant licensee would pay $2,500 this year rather than the full $5,000. So it may be delayed, but we get these Appendix Cs done within the fiscal year. Then once we're able to issue that license, we'll be accepting the last portion of the payment. The other half.
So you're accepting money to process the their application in the Appendix Cs, and then if they pass that, then there'll be the other fee that's tagged. So they're not, so basically they're not getting hit with code enforcement fee.
Or
Until-
general plan fee, yeah, they're just paying half.
Until after they are eligible for their license.
Correct. Eligible for a license being Appendix C, determination of completion, or
Right.
determination and an issued notice of determination by the planning commission.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay, I'm going to skip down. We don't have anything budgeted in the categories 7190 state grant income. Nothing listed in budgeted for the current fiscal year in 8028 and 8420 general plan update fee. Interfund revenue budgeted 11,500 for revenue. The actuals in 2021 were $7,068. Nothing budgeted for 9255. Nothing budgeted for 9256. And nothing budgeted for other revenue, which is 9299. Miscellaneous revenues, nothing budgeted at this time. And then that brings us to expenditures.
Can I ask another income question? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, please.
So, the monies that the state has said that they're going to give out for environmental compliance, I believe it was actually quite a hunk of money.
3.7 million.
Yeah, and also equity monies are that I think we are working on getting grants for. Is that right, Richard? Or?
There's an equity grant that's being written up by a third-party consultant.
Yeah.
And that's separate than the state allocated money, that's my understanding.
Okay, so the equity grant would probably not be running through planning, it would be running through somebody for grants or something. And what about the $3.7 million? Is that a thing that we're guaranteed to get, or?
I believe so, but that's through the, I'm losing the name of the grant for some reason right now.
Well, it's the $100 million total through that.
Yeah, it's divided by 17 counties.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna get to 3.5.
Yeah,
So-
I think we're right at 3.4, 3.7 for the,
I mean, if that's going, depending on what strings, do we know what strings? We don't know enough about this for be budgeting.
yeah, and some of it we can use for consultants. So it is, we can offset some of the consulting costs with that funding. I think Susie Copeland's on the line, she's the one who's consistent with that. So it's not, and it has something with equity, I can't remember the name of the grant is.
Well, I guess my point here is that we have a almost, or a high chance of $3.7 million coming, or 3.5, whatever it is. That's a pretty big game changer in a $2 million budget, so.
Equity ordinance, is that what it is?
Well, the one was just for environmental.
Yeah, there's equity and then there's environmental. That wasn't the SB2.
Do we know when those funds
No.
are available? When they'll be appropriated?
I think it's still a decent ways out.
I apologize. I have not been able to take part in the grant conversations. I was on a call for the equity grant, but I have not been able to work on those, so I don't have information for you.
Either of them, since,
I haven't been either, sorry. Likely though, it'll be similar to our ARP funds, that once we know for sure exactly what they are, then we'll come back with a budget adjustment to appropriate them so we can spend them in accordance with their guidelines. but I wasn't involved in them, so I'm not sure what they are or what the guidelines are.
Chair, Mr. Brower has what I hope is clear, concise information.
Yeah, the equity conversation is a very important one. Perhaps Adrian Keys or Carly Ottawa could also answer these questions in greater detail. But my understanding is there's several different funding pools from the state. That we have normal Mount Cursa funding pool, which we should be familiar with and is existing. Then we have the new California Comeback Funds, which include a big chunk of money for local ordinance implementation and environmental work. It can be for environmental compliance and for environmental restoration projects. Then in addition to that, there's other governor trailer bill funds that include a giant chunk for there's separate pools for enforcement, environmental cleanup, and jurisdictions to develop their programs. And then also out of the California Comeback grants, there's over 100 million statewide specifically for local equity programs. But Trinity County doesn't have a local equity program yet. We know what the requirements are from the state. Very clear, they're in Mount Cursa now. It is a huge opportunity missed to not prioritize immediate equity program. We can't apply for any of these grants unless our program has very clear goals and very clear metrics to determine if you're meeting those goals or not. It's also one of the things that our entire program is lacking, is a real objective and a means of measuring if we're getting there or not. So.
Okay, thank you, John.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Susie Cochran's has been able to join the meeting. I think she was trying to.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm back on.
There we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jeremy has asked me to speak a little bit about the Cannabis Equity Program, and I'm not sure if you're aware of the process, but last year we applied for funding to start the Cannabis Equity Program, and that entails the first bucket of money, which is for the assessment process. We cannot move forward with the Cannabis Equity Program implementation and applying for that grant revenue until we do the assessment. So we were awarded the funding to conduct the assessment. We are currently in the process of getting the Humboldt State University contractor. They are going to serve as the consultant who is going to draft the assessment and work through the entire process. That entity has done multiple Cannabis Equity Program assessments in the northern part of the state. So I feel confident that they're the right entity to tackle the process. Once we get through that assessment, then that sets us up to apply for bucket number 2, which is program implementation funding. I sit on a committee of cannabis equity county staff or city staff, depending on the jurisdiction, and we talk about, the program itself and implementation. There's several counties that are already well into the implementation process. There are a handful of counties just like us that are just getting started. So we can bounce ideas off each other and get, best practices in place. Just something to be cognizant of as we move through not only the assessment, but the program implementation side, which is about a year away. That when we design the program, we have to be very flexible. The best practices from the other jurisdictions is, you'll go down a road and you'll realize, oh, we've got to change things up, and don't let that surprise you or be shocking in any manner, because when you change your program, you're meeting the needs of your community. So just something to be aware of down the road, but we're about a year out from that right now. So I look forward to the assessment process starting rather soon.
And that's separate than the AB 128, $3.2 million for Trinity County, is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And I get a lot of information across my desk about all kinds of community and social service programs. That one has not really hit my radar as far as, you know, an influx of information and deadlines. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more research and get back to you on that. But it is a different fund.
Any other questions for Susie from the board?
No, thank you, Susan.
Thanks so much, Susie, appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
So, I guess the takeaway here is somebody needs to kind of figure out what's going on with that 3 million plus money that we all heard was coming, but, so.
If this is Susie, do we allocation or is that grant revenue?
It's allocated.
Allocated, yeah.
Susie, I'll get you some more information on that.
That'd be great, and I'll follow up. Appreciate it.
So Richard, is that the plan for Susie to follow that up?
Yes.
Okay, all right. All right, that's all I have on revenue. We'd sure like to get an update on that as soon as we.
So your update, Keith, include what we're getting and then when are we getting?
Yeah.
Okay. That's big, man.
Susie, this is Kim. If you could include me in that, any email correspondence as well, please, so I'm also aware.
Your bet.
Thank you. Okay, I think we got into expenditures, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so at the bottom of page 119, we have some information on expenditures. Right there at the bottom, there's a heading, expenditures / financing uses. So I will be starting there and then moving on to page 120. So the requested budget for 21-22, excuse me, I'm going to go with recommended budget. That's the last column on the right-hand side. Is, so for 21-22, regular salaries, $514,948. No money in extra help salary at this time. Overtime salary, $5,000. I'm going to stop there. Do you want me also to go over actuals from the previous year as well, or may I just focus on the proposed budget?
It's fine with me if you focus on proposed, unless the board plans otherwise.
Is that okay? I'll keep on then. Get my ruler here so I stay on the right line. Okay, overtime salary is $5,000. Social Security, $39,394. HERS retirement, $219,369. And Laguna pension, $2,204. Moving on to page 120. Benefits, $94,657. Group insurance retiree, $228,95. Unemployment insurance, $4,973. Workers' compensation, $10,476. Salaries and Benefits has a total recommended budget of $1,119,116. Communications, $7,000.
Can we talk about that as we go?
Sorry, I'll slow down so you can.
Now, I think it is noteworthy to point out that that's a $500,000 increase from the actuals of last year. Am I doing that right? 400,000 anyway. And that last year was down, and that's because the inability to staff. We were down 100,000. I assume that's from the inability to staff from 19 to 20.
Yeah, that is from not filling vacant positions and also losing staff and either deciding not to fill those positions to reorganize the staff organization of the department, or excuse me, the division, or just not be able to fill those positions.
So, 400,000, is that five more people, or is that's not consultants, right? This is actually.
No, this is salaries for county staff. And if you recall, I can't remember when it was, but I think it was in the spring, we came forward for the direction of the board with additional allocations for the cannabis department because of the need for those staff members. That included environmental compliance specialists, 2 allocations, planners, additional accounting person, and environmental compliance specialist, and additional admin support. And also, of course, we already are allocated for a cannabis program manager position. That might have been included at the time, though, as well. So we did come forth with additional allocations and reassigned positions too, where we had very heavy admin staff before. We've wanted to change out those admin positions for planners or environmental compliance specialists. So that does reflect increased. We already have a cost savings the first couple months of the fiscal year because many of those positions remain unfilled, as we discussed briefly yesterday.
So, if you had a full functioning department and you could weed through, say you got to the 300 that we discussed yesterday, that would increase your income by $1 million.
That's the hope.
Right. And obviously, yeah.
Which would offset the deficit spending that
The
they have this year.
$1 million
Yeah, the
deficit.
$1 million
We'll get there,
spending.
Susan. Always looking at the deficit.
Kim, does the 2 new hires that we talked about yesterday, is that reflected anywhere in here?
The 2 new contractors?
Not the 2 new contractors we put out for 2 other employees yesterday. Not the.
That was for DOT.
The
environmental compliance, that was DOT.
So my next question was the consultants.
The consultants, we'll get to that in professional and specialized budget. They're not included, consultants and contractors are not included in county staff budgets.
Just to jump in back to the monies for Trinity County, the application process is still in draft format. The comments end on September 27th of this month.
And is that the equity one, or is that the?
This is the one that can go, the 100 million, that can go the social equity programs.
Okay.
And it's pretty broad how it can be interpreted and used.
Which may or may not have benefit to the cannabis program.
No, it offers supporting an existing cannabis equity program, creating a program, technical stuff, environmental stuff.
All the people that pay taxes and didn't work in cannabis get paid because it was unequitable.
I can't comment on that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good. Okay, I do want to point out that in the 2021 budget, the salaries, everything we just went through, that accounted for 14.6% of the cannabis budget for expenditures.
Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense.
No.
Say that again.
In 2021, the salaries and benefits accounted for 14.6% of the budget.
That math doesn't add up to.
Yeah.
2021.
That's
the
688,000
688,000 of actual salaries and benefits that were paid for staff in the previous fiscal year.
Yeah, but 700,000 into 2 million isn't 14%.
That's 700, it's
It's more like 30%.
like 38%.
It's 30.7 for total salaries and benefits. Kim, are you looking at just regular salaries? What percentage did you report?
Yeah, I'm looking at just regular salaries.
Regular salaries.
I apologize.
Just
That's
their,
gonna make a lot more sense.
just their gross salaries for the employees was 14.6% of the budget for 2021.
And it was 30.7 for
And then
all of the
another
benefits and salaries.
16% for benefits.
Okay,
That math working better for you?
that math works
Okay.
better. The cost is the total, not the.
Yeah, it's 30.7% of.
Yeah, sorry, I was
Expenditures.
highlighting, when I was going down, I was highlighting the most, and so I apologize. Yes, that was just salaries.
So fully weighted about a third.
Yes.
30.7%, yeah.
Yes, and that was the concept I was trying to relay. Okay, so heading into services and supplies. And I will let you know right now that in 2021 that accounted for services and supplies that we'll be going over. Last fiscal year accounted for 9.1% of the budget. Communications, $7,000. Household, $200. Equipment maintenance, $5,000. Maintenance of structures, $2,000. Memberships, $250. Office expenses, $18,800. Professional and specialized, and we will go into a little bit more detail on that, probably, especially I have figures from last year. But professional and specialized, that includes interfund services and supplies and professional services. So that includes sheriff, code enforcement sheriff, building, tax collector, DOT, environmental health, planning, county council, general counsel, county council litigation, IT, general services, and admin. So these are the folks that are also part of the professional services budget. They support us in what?
These aren't part of your 2300 account code. All of those are paid out of your interfund professional and specialized services, which is $23.99 or $22.99. They're not in that 200 income code. Your professional and specialized is just your consultants, your SHN, your Ascent, the 2 new contractors that we just got on.
Okay,
So
sorry.
that's why the big jump up is for the 2 new contractors.
Kim, those ones that you just listed are in that next section below your services and supplies.
Yeah.
And we have that broken down on the.
So,
Yes. Not for 20, it's broken down on the paper that was provided to you for 1920 and for 2021.
Right. So
Not broken out for 21-22.
So 2199, we have nothing budgeted.
Correct.
So I automatically skip to the next line.
so between 2,300 and the total benefits, next year we'll have $1.6 million, now again my round numbers that I love, going to directly to permits, to environmental work, to getting licenses out. Between those 2, that's just direct to get this program rolling. Is that correct?
Support the issue of a license.
Yes, support the issue of license for the growers.
Yes.
So $1.6 million next year.
Likely. I'd have to look to make sure there's nobody else being paid out of account 2300. Any other professional and contractors that we're paying for something that's related to the program, but not necessarily the direct issuance of the license. And Kim may know that off the top of her head. I don't know what vendors you pay.
What vendors we pay?
We pay California Safe,
Safety, California safety.
Is that California safety? Okay. So that also comes out of there, and that's for alarm systems for the building. But so there's some other small numbers that probably come out of that.
But I was 40,000 under, so my 1.6 is still a pretty nice round number.
Yeah, likely that's pretty accurate.
All right.
One other thing that comes out of there is Derek Colhuber. So the services that he provides to support the program.
Yes, that's correct. Another item that comes out of there is all the work that David does on the program.
Well, that's direct benefit.
That's,
No.
no,
Keith's asking about account 2300, outside vendors, professional specialists. David's going to come under your 2399.
he goes under interfund.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
So we're gonna say you're pretty accurate.
all right, close enough.
All right, fair enough.
Where's mine?
With additional little tack on, it's super close. All right.
Okay, so we've covered interfund expenses. Yes?
No, we're at 2313.
Yeah. Physicals and drug testing, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
Kim, you're still up in services and supplies.
Yeah. Okay, $850, physicals and drug testing. Publications and notices, $5,000. Rents and leases of equipment, $2,000. Rents and leases of structure, $4,800. Small tools and instruments, $1,000. And nothing budgeted for special department expenses. Travel, $70,500. Travel covers the cost of fuel for our inspectors and any site visits, along with training and going back and forth to meetings and other events. Training, $7,500, and utilities, $5,000.
So another question is, since halfway through the year, through a Susie year, we'll be moving into the new building, and so the rents, shouldn't they be dropping, or actually shouldn't the building paying into the cannabis fund at that point?
Yes, once planning and cannabis move into the new building, then planning will be required to pay rent to cannabis for their usage.
Right. And so where is that in this?
That would come in as an interfund revenue, $8,900.
And we dedicated for that. And it was very interesting.
$11,500 budgeted.
Okay, so there's a $3,000 swing out in that. So then what are these rents for structures for $4,800?
Modular, and the time we're still in the office
Okay.
of the airport.
And those will be, as we move over to the new building, those modules will be returned.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, the modular is scheduled to ship out on the 30th of this month. We've already cleaned it out.
Maybe the hospital needs
Thank you, I needed that laugh. Okay, so the total of the recommended budget for services and supplies, again, is $659,900. Okay, we've kind of already covered interfund maintenance, 2199, nothing budgeted, 2299, interfund services support, 500, 2399, which is professional services interfund, that's the $1,200,000 $220,503. And that's that budget item. Interfund fuel and travel expenses, $10,000. Fixed assets and structures, $35,000. Nothing budgeted for fixed assets interfund.
Okay, so what's in 2399, if we could break that down?
Yeah, so
I
that's
assume
what I was attempting to do before.
Okay, so how much goes to code enforcement out of that?
Bear with me, I'm gonna pull up Kim's
Thank you.
requested budget notes.
These are actual from last year.
Okay.
Yeah, I have actuals from last year, but I don't have a breakdown.
It looks like 662,403 is for code enforcement. Budgeted.
Right, and so the actuals last year were 470.
So I have one question. In both categories, salaries and supply and services and supply, travel has jumped up substantially. I'm sure there's a reason. No, I've seen gas prices on the gas station. Is there doubled in 2750, just about doubled from actuals from last year?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there must be a reason. And then when we get down to interfund fuel and travel expenses for this year, 2799, it went from 2,000 at 5 times to 10,000. So I was just wondering what the increase was there.
So I think part of that increase is the expectation that we're gonna hire more cannabis compliance officers and more staff that are gonna need to be out in the field, which means there's gonna be more miles traveled, which means there's gonna be more fuel and travel expenses associated with that. The interfund travel is when we are able to fill up here locally and purchase gas directly from the county's DOT gas pumps. That's where we pay that back, which is usually the goal because it's cheaper than we can get it on the regular market. The other addition, Kim, was there new vehicles purchased in cannabis?
Yes.
With new staff, there's new vehicles that are required to be purchased, and that's part of that increase in the travel budget, the 2750 account, because when we purchase them through the motor pool, we then depreciate them over 5 years, so they're charged a increased monthly cost to recoup the cost of that vehicle over the next 5 years. That way they have a replacement bank in the motor pool, so when they need to replace that vehicle in 5 years, they don't have to put the money up front. They've already essentially started that savings account to replace that vehicle. They only have to pay the inflation cost from what the vehicle cost in 2020 to what the vehicle costs in 2025. That's the amount that they have to then come up with. So those are part of the larger increases.
And currently, we only have 2 cannabis vehicles right now. And we have 2 compliance specialists and 1 for myself and other staff. So yeah, we definitely need vehicles.
So there's a purchase of a vehicle this year. So in order to buy into the motor pool program, you purchase the vehicle in motor pool, and then motor pool bills you for that vehicle again over the next 5 years, anticipating that you're going to replace that vehicle in 5 years, and that way in 5 years you don't have to come up with the full price of the vehicle. You only have to come up with the difference of the inflation cost.
Sure.
It's a planning mechanism to kind of smooth costs throughout the year instead of having to come up with large $50,000 every 5 years. You have to come up with $10,000 every year for the next 5 years.
Just to clarify or add on to that, I think you're looking at lines 2750 and 2799, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So if you look at the 2 columns on the right, the budget actually hasn't changed. It's consistent from, the requested budget. I'm not sure if it went up from the previous year. Let me look real quick here.
Yeah, Craig, it increased over actuals from 2021.
Almost
doubled.
Exactly.
From actuals, yes, but if you look at the working budget that we used when we had information from the departments,
right,
2050 was actually 82,750 in the prior year.
Yeah,
So
they don't have that in front of them.
No.
That's information that we use.
Kind of what I'm trying to get at is I don't think that this really increased as much as the actuals are low because there was less travel going on because of COVID. And so we're expecting that at some point, the COVID restrictions and all of that will reduce and we'll be back on traveling and making meetings that, instead of them being Zoom meetings, they'll be meetings at locations to meet face-to-face again. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Oh, that's a good point.
So can we go back up to 2399? So the sheriff's budgeted is 630, you said?
662,403. So we've got, to make up that number in 2029, we've got $2,000 that we're sending to DOT. And I don't know, is that, no, that's not for David, that must be for Lisa's fiscal support,
And this year?
budgeted in 21-22. You have budgeted $2,000 for DOT.
If that's David, we're getting a good deal.
No, we have 35,000 for David.
That's still a good deal.
Lisa does still assist us. We have our own fiscal person, Mary Evans, she's on the line, hopefully. Mary, are you on? Can you answer?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, wasn't sure if it was gonna work.
Okay, did you hear the question about the $2,000?
The $2,000 DOT is what was due at time we were doing the budget. And I'm gonna say that's probably undershooting how much I've had to journal entry over, but that was what was due at the time when I was making budget.
I'm pretty sure that is for, it's what DOT charges us to reimburse them for Lisa's time that she spends in supporting Mary and Kim in the cannabis budget.
Thanks.
Then there's $128,600 for environmental health. It's gonna go to environmental health for inspections and, it says INV, I'm not sure.
Inspections.
5,000.
I'm looking at my notes as well, I'm sorry.
5,000.
It's inspections and it's just invoicing at 128.
So that's time that environmental health.
For inspections and enforcement.
So that's time that environmental health spends doing inspections for the cannabis cultivation sites. Okay, please jump in if I'm misspeaking at any point in time.
No, that's correct. Right on track.
$5,900. It's going to go to planning for the time that the planners that are paid out of planning spend supporting cannabis applications.
Yeah. Lots of times there has to be crossover.
Okay. $9,600 for building, which is when our building inspectors have to go out and do.
We get a lot of support
Again,
from our other departments.
It does have to do with building supporting cannabis. These are all inter-funds, that's the proper terminology, invoicing that I have to do. From cannabis, invoicing, buildings, paying that cannabis. Same with planning.
And then, like I said, there's $35,000 for David's time. There's the $662,403 for code enforcement. There's $150,000 for county council.
How much for county council?
$150.
And that's just general, not litigation.
Correct.
Okay. And then there's $29,000 for IT support. And what I don't see listed in here is the amounts that the cannabis department is going to have to pay to the treasurer's office for doing deposits, for collecting the payments on cannabis's behalf, the auditor's office for processing payroll warrants and processing vendor warrants, HR department for processing recruitments and providing that employee support, the admin office for all of the time that Richard spends that is directly related to cannabis, and any time that I spend that is directly related to supporting the cannabis program. General services for any maintenance that they provide on the building. Those are all things that we have to, as service departments, we bill out to the departments that we're providing those supports to, those services to.
So where is Derek? Was he in that?
Derek is in the 2300 account up in services and supplies because he's an outside vendor. So we pay him under standard services and supplies. The inter-fund accounts are only for when we're paying essentially another county department.
Okay. So litigation, where's that at?
The cannabis litigation, marijuana litigation, if we're paying county council, it should be under the 2399 as well. Because
So you're budgeting 150 for council and litigation. I'm sorry. What, I don't know how to look at it.
that's what they're budgeting. I'd have to look. I don't know that that is going to be consistent with what was paid last year.
Yeah,
prior years.
We have
Maybe
not.
low.
So last year,
So
for general counsel, we haven't been billed yet for last year, and for litigation, that came to $433,386, which was 19.32% of the entire budget for expenditures.
So likely that budget line item will need to increase to cover.
Well, maybe we won't be litigated.
Maybe we won't. Maybe we won't have all those issues.
Eternal optimist.
I am. Well, one of the people asking that question was one of the litigators, so I know that was one or two from that person. Okay. So I think part of what, unless I'm doing the math wrong here, code enforcement equals 22% of the budget. I think that's a good take-home out of this budget.
22% of the total budget?
Yeah,
You're
it's,
looking at? Yeah.
so I'm looking at $630,000 out of a $2.9 million budget. It's 22%. I think that's a good number to stick in our heads because we kept getting told that we're spending half our money for that, and it's not. It's less than a quarter.
Correct.
So where we really need to try to trim down some litigation issues. and that's kind of out of our control. If we're functioning and working well, hopefully those issues go down.
And I would just clarify that it's 22% that you're budgeting for that cost, but the actual cost is probably much lower than that.
Yes, no, I understand. It will be lower this year because the team is on fire saving people's lives. So.
Correct.
Is this a good time? Can Susie Cochran's come back on and give that update?
Hi, everybody. So I had the opportunity to give the state a call. The Cannabis Equity Program is definitely different than this $3.7 million. It's actually $3.295 million. That is a new program through the Cannabis Control Agency. 17 cities and counties were selected to receive funding based on the number of temporary applications that are kind of in a status hold or there are long-term needs with CEQA or environmental concerns. So we were one of the 17 that were selected. There's currently draft program guidelines out there for public input and review. That will close. We will open up the solicitation, the RFP, NOFA, whatever you call it, on October 8th. We will have until November 15th to submit an application for the allocation of $3.295 in funding, and they're going to turn around and make a decision rather quickly because it's already an allocation. So that is definitely separate, and in addition to the Cannabis Equity Program. With respect to the Cannabis Equity Program, in talking to the state, we will not be eligible for that funding until October-ish, fall of 2022, because we have to have the assessment completed. And the board has to have adopted a cannabis equity program. If we can accomplish that by October 2022, then we will be eligible for the next round of funding. And 20 million additional dollars were added to the 15 million in this year's budget. So there's 35 million the equity program, and that's, you know, for technical assistance for helping licensees in the jurisdiction. So, you know, in the next year, a year and maybe 14 months, we could have potentially, you know, $6 million to assist our cannabis equity and cannabis program. So that's a really quick update, but that's where we're at right now.
Susie, this is Keith. The 3.2 million, is that a one-time thing, or is that something we can tap in for several years?
It was only in the budget for once, but you know, the gal that I talked to at the state, Christina Dempsey, says, you know, if the program is successful, it's so new, you know, they're still learning as well. If it is successful, there could be future opportunity, but it's only been budgeted one time.
So we need to get as much as that 3.2 available to us as possible.
Yes, for sure.
Like 3.19999.
Like 3.295 and some change.
Okay, all right. All right, so that definitely is possible in the latter half of Susie's year.
Yes, sure. Yes.
All right, thank you so much, Susie, appreciate your time.
You bet. My pleasure.
Where are we at now?
We are at other charges, I believe,
Yes.
which would be 3232. Contributions to agency funds, $100. Susie, what is that?
That is the account code that we have to use whenever we are paid via check and it's returned. There's a return check fee that the department that deposited the check has to pay to the Treasury Department for processing that return check fee.
Wow.
Yeah, we get a few of those in cannabis.
Yeah. So.
Refunds and overpayments, 2,000. Judgments and damages, no budget for this year. Budget item 3400. Other charges, well, now we're going into fixed assets, actually.
Is the new building in here under fixed assets?
The new building is under actuals from 2021. The $300,333 was the purchase of the building, I believe.
Correct.
And the requested budget is $125,000, requested and recommended.
And those are for the improvements?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're at fixed assets, which brings us to a total of $125,000 for fixed assets. Transfers out $35,000 is budgeted.
That's for the purchase of the new vehicle for the cannabis department.
Good.
So my original example said a $50,000. It's actually a $35,000 vehicle. It'll be amortized over 5 years. So we pay for it up front and we amortize it over 5 years and recoup the cost of it again. That way in 5 years, when we go to replace it, we don't have to come up with the $35,000. We only have to come up with 10, or whatever the inflation cost is at that point in time.
Tow truck company.
So in summary, revenue sources, recommended budget is $2,055,500. Expenditures and uses amount to $2,974,119, which means there is a deficit of $918,619, which I will let Susie and Craig speak to.
So how much carryover do we have?
Sorry, I'm running a report as you were talking, so.
No, that's okay. Cannabis, 239. We have a problem. We have $901,624.24, which does not cover our deficit. So let me run cash as of today real quick.
Oh, we're pretty close then.
What did you say, 914?
901,
901?
901,624.24.
Well, we used to go over this, like every department like this.
Oh, that's what I took 3 days.
That's why I took 3 days, yeah.
No. Pictures they're used. This won't work, does it? Where's that from?
As of today, we have 1.15 in fund balance, so
So we can pay the bills? is what you're
we
telling
can
me?
pay the bills.
So carryover would be 600,000? Maybe over 600,000 carryover would be.
No carryover. If we spend as budgeted based on cash carryover, we're gonna have $100,000 carry over into the next fiscal year to balance the budget, which if we continue in a deficit spending, then
Not so good.
we're gonna run into some larger problems.
But based on the fact that we're gonna have a fully functioning program with our 530 licenses by July 1st for Susie's next year, no problem.
Then we should be okay. If we're able to increase our revenues by issuing more licenses, then we'll be good.
Which we have the potential.
Yep.
All right, I'm done asking questions.
Any other questions from the board? Questions from the board? Completed the cannabis budget then.
Okay, now you get to.
All right, let's back to Zoom.
We'll now take public comment on the cannabis budget and department.
Okay. Adrian Keys.
Hi, good afternoon, Adrian Keys from Dayfork. Man, thank you so much for doing that breakdown. It is so helpful. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time reading this budget as best I could, but there's so much that cannot be extrapolated out of the gross data, so that was super helpful. Thank you. I'm glad to see that with the carryover, we're going to stay in the black in the program. I do think there are probably areas that could be trimmed prior to going to the red if that's where we end up next year, and I surely hope the litigation costs are one of those. A functioning program could theoretically help solve some of those problems. There's a lot of areas there that have been kind of messy, so hopefully it gets cleaned up. I do wonder, I picked up the $120,000 for environmental health, and there was some amount for building department and also for the CAO to be reimbursed for time they put into the cannabis program. One, I'm wondering what exactly environmental health does, I'm curious, and also the building department that isn't otherwise covered by their own fee structures. Like I'm imagining environmental health doing a well inspection to sign it off or some other thing like that, or building department relative to a cannabis building on the property as infrastructure. how the building permit fees or the well fees or the septic tank fees or whichever of those that are paid as a standard interface with this, I mean, $120,000 to environmental health, and apologize, I missed the number for the building department, but those are two questions that I have. And in all honesty, many of the other questions I had were answered throughout this. I may not always be happy with how the money is spent, but having it played out in a public forum is tremendously helpful. And I really do appreciate your time on this. And I would appreciate answers if you can give them to me. Thank you.
We can write the answers down and then we'll go through them at the end if it's the pleasure of the board. Or would you like to do them at each?
Yeah, as many questions as we could answer would be great.
Okay, so would you prefer we write them down and then answer at the end so we can let the public flow?
Yeah, that works for me.
So you got those questions?
That's gonna be a question for Kim actually on what environmental health, what services they provide to.
All right, is there anybody else on Zoom wishing to make public comment?
I have no raised hands and no new chats.
All right, well, we'll get back to those questions now.
You know why? That's because John's here.
John's got to have a question.
Who's got to be last?
We'll assume that there's no questions because we're so thorough and everyone was so thorough and did such a good job explaining everything.
You guys did do a good job. Thanks for taking this extra time and doing this hand-holding on this important subject. Overall, it does seem like the requested budget is a little lean for a fully functioning, high-functioning department that needs to pull off some miracles in a short period of time. But it's great to know that there is accountability and that you guys do know where the money is. Yeah, I mean, I think a fee study for a fully functioning, well-oiled cannabis department that it can really fire on all cylinders, it's a top priority. And now we're getting a better idea of what that might look like. Perhaps there's a mid-year budget adjustment or something where Cannabis Division can have more updated requests, and we need to put some bodies behind these desks in the new department. And boy, it's really important to pay those people what they're really worth, and to be able to attract and retain talent. And it's good to see us moving forward. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Unless there's any other public comment in the room, we'll close down public comment and see if the board has any other questions, concerns.
We'll have Kim answer that question.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Now, for building, we, with our shortage of staff members, we have had to borrow staff members from other departments. Especially in the building department and planning. So much of that time has been billed for tasks that are cannabis specific, just pulling someone over because I couldn't get to it, or one of the other staff members. So when Bella Headkey, for example, our associate planner, who was associate planner in planning, was working on cannabis projects. She did a lot of director's use permits and variances and work on those projects. She was in planning but would bill cannabis this last fiscal year. Building department staff, their admin coordinator, and building inspector also were pulled over into cannabis when needed to assist. So those are some examples of where those departments, where that billing comes for those departments. Environmental health is a little bit different. They actually are going out on site looking at cannabis sites. They're called on site for any potential environmental crimes or toxic situations, they go out on site. And if it's a cannabis related situation, they will bill cannabis for those services. They're also going to our licensed sites to make sure that there are appropriate setbacks from water bodies. And like I said, whenever they're needed for a potential situation with maybe a sewage spill or something like that from an RV or something happens on a site, they will go out for those. And if it's a cannabis site, they will bill cannabis.
So if they're coming out, and doing that, just like a code violation, that money goes to, legal fees, gets directed. I think we should look at taking the money out of violation fines and reimbursing things like that.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I do need to clarify, and I don't have this information now. Mary, are you on the line? Did you get my text message?
Hi, I'm still on the line, and no, I did not see your text.
Okay, my question was, what is environmental health billing to cannabis?
And you were very accurate, Kim, because
Okay.
I went ahead and pulled up the invoices where I've done the inter-fund invoicing between all 4 departments. And environmental health, basically, they end up going on these code enforcement calls for cannabis sites where they end up running into the very same thing Kim has said. They find toxic waste, they find wells that are non-existent or unpermitted or is tapped into a different source, same with septic, same with any kind of trash, any kind of soil, fertilizer, and that type of thing. They run into all these situations. That's just the minimum of what they do for cannabis. So it is over and above what they're structured to do in a regular task of a day. For environmental health, I mean, you're just going to kind of go and get these calls for, oh, I need to get my septic permitted because you don't inspect, that type of thing. They run on to these properties that are, some of them are legal, some of them are illegal, mostly illegal, but they run into these health and environmental hazards. And so that's the reason why cannabis is getting billed for that.
So if it's illegal activity, should be billing the cannabis program?
Yeah, I think we need to come back and take a more careful look at what EH is billing. Definitely. I do have a concern there.
Yeah, I agree that quite possibly should be included into the fines situation. So yeah, I would hopefully that we could direct you to come back with some sort of answer there, or somebody to come back.
Can you direct that now?
Yeah, that's my...
That would be my direction too. I don't have any reason to think it could, well, I don't think it should come out of the cannabis program. I think it should come out of the fines that are paid by the illegal cannabis grower.
Right, and along with that, I also will take a look at building and environmental health to make sure, just so we have protocols on what can be billed to our cannabis program, rather than, I think it's it needs to be defined. I think that's very important for all of the 3 departments that I oversee.
Very good.
And then I have one other clarification, and so it's being said and bantied around that code enforcement's not, and part of the program. And there's confusion there in the EIR. It's not, code enforcement cannot, illegal activity can't be part of an EIR. And in legal advice is that we can't mitigate activity in a legal field by stopping illegal activity. So it is, code enforcement is not part of an EIR.
Yes, yeah, very good point. For clarification, the context of the EIR is environmental impacts.
Right.
And addressing those that are under the jurisdiction of the county, and illegal activities for the program in an environmental context are not.
Right, so just, and when we say it's not part of the program, and I don't think that's exactly what we said, but that's what was heard, it is not part of the EIR program, but it is part of the cannabis program. And so we have plowed this field several times before, but we'll do it again. So that is a very different thing for information out there.
Any other questions or comments from the board? I'll just say again, I'm very impressed with the ability to be able to go through it on point and navigate it all. So kudos to everybody involved. It has nothing to do with me.
Thank you very much. You guys did a great job.
Can I ask?
Oh, we need a motion.
Clarify, we don't need a motion, I just need formal direction. But the board is directing us to bring back a final budget resolution at our special meeting on September 7th, or I'm sorry, September 27th, which includes the corrections and additions that were added to the proposed budget book yesterday.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, this meeting's adjourned.
And Susie, while we're all here, did we get the November 9th thing figured out?
November 29th, are you available?
Am I the one that didn't?
Always.
Hey.